Chapter 4. The Workhouse. Jim and his mother walked for most of that day, but they made very slow progress. They rested a bit near a statue of a man on a horse, and after a very short distance they had to stop again for Mrs. Jarvis to scoop water from a fountain. And on they went, trudging and stopping, until Jim's mother could go no further. She put her arms round Jim and pressed her head down onto his shoulder. "God bless you, Jim," she said. It seemed to Jim that she was simply tired then of walking and that she'd decided to go to sleep there on the pavement. He squatted down beside her, glad of the rest, feeling dizzy and tired himself, and was aware of a worry of voices around him, like flies buzzing. Someone shook him and he opened his eyes. "Where do you live?" a voice asked. Jim sat up. Already it was growing dark. There were people around him, and some were kneeling by his mother, trying to lift her. "We used to live in a cottage," said Jim. "We had a cow and some hens." "Where do you live now?" It was a different voice, a bit sharper than the last one. Jim tried to remember the name of the street where they had rented a room in Mr. Spink's big house, and couldn't. He couldn't understand why his mother didn't wake up. He looked around for his bundle and saw that his wooden horse had gone. He clutched Lizzie's old boots. "You ain't got nowhere?" the same voice asked. Jim shook his head. Someone was doing something to his mother, rubbing her hands it looked like, and dabbing her face with a shawl. "Get them to the workhouse," someone said. "There's nothing we can do for her." "I'm not taking them there," said another voice. "Prison would be better than there. Tell them we've caught the boys stealing and let them put them both in prison." "Someone stole my horse," Jim heard himself saying. He couldn't keep his voice steady. "I didn't steal anything." "Give him his horse back," someone else said. "It's all he's got, ain't it? A pair of boots what's too big for him, and a wooden horse. Give it back." There was a burst of laughter, and some children broke away from the group and ran off. The next minute there was a shouting from the far end of the street, and the people who had been crouching round Jim and his mother stood up and moved away. He heard other voices and looked up to see two policemen. "Get up," one of the policemen ordered. Jim struggled to his feet. "And you, get up," the other one said to Jim's mother. She lay quite still. The first policeman waved his hand and a boy with a cart ran up. Between them they lifted Jim's mother onto it. Jim watched, afraid. "Take 'em to the workhouse," the policeman said. "Let 'em die in there if they have to." The boy began to run then, head down, skidding on the snowy road, weaving the cart in and out of the carriages, and Jim ran anxiously behind. They came at last to a massive stone building with iron railings round it. Weary people slouched there, begging for food. The boy stopped the cart outside the huge iron gates and pulled the bell. Jim could hear it clanging in the distance. At last the gates were pulled open by a porter, who glared out at them, his lantern held high. "Two more for you," said the boy. "One for the infirmary, one for the school." The porter led them into a yard. There, on the steps on each side of the main door, stood a man and a woman, as straight and as thin and as waxy-faced as a pair of church candles, staring down at them. The boy held out his hand and was given a small coin, and the master and matron bent down and lifted Jim's mother off the cart and carried her into the house. The boy pushed his cart out and the porter clanged the gates shut. The matron poked her head sharply round the door. "Get in," she told Jim and pulled him through. "You, come and get scrubbed and cropped." The doors groaned too. They were in a long corridor, gloomy with candle shadow. In front of them a man trudged with Jim's mother across his shoulder. "Where's Ma going?" Jim asked, his voice echoing against the tiles like the whimpering of a tiny scared animal. "Where's she going? Infirmary, that's where she's going. Wants feeding and medicine, no doubt. And nothing to buy it with either." Can I go with her? Go with her? A strong boy like you? You cannot. If you're good, Mr. Sissons might let you see her tomorrow. Good, mind. You know what that means. The matron closed their ice-cold hand over his and bent down towards him, her black bonnet crinkling. Her teeth were as black and as twisted as the railings in the yard. She pulled Jim along the corridor and into a huge green room where boys sat in silence, staring at each other and at the bare walls. They all watched Jim as he was led through the room and out into another yard. Joseph, the matron called, and a bent man shuffled after her. His head hung below his shoulders like a stumpy bird's. He helped her to strip off Jim's clothes and sluice him down with icy water from the pump. Then Jim was pulled into rough, itchy clothes, and his hair was tugged and jagged at with a blunt pair of scissors until it felt like his scalp had been torn into pieces. He let it all happen to him. He was too frightened to resist. All he wanted was to be with his mother. He was led back into a huge hall and told to join the queue of silent boys there. They stood with their heads bowed and bowls in their hands. There were hundreds and hundreds of people in the room, all sitting at long tables, all eating in silence. The only sound was the scraping of the knives and forks and the noise of chewing and gulping. All the benches faced the same way. Mr. Sissons stood on a raised box at the end of the room, watching everyone as they waited for their food. Jim was given a ladle of broth and a corner of bread. "I don't want anything," he started to say, and was pushed along in the queue. He followed the boy in front of him and sat on one of the benches. He glanced around, trying to catch someone's eye, but none of the boys looked at him. They all ate with their heads bowed down, staring into their bowls. The boy next to him sneaked his hand across and grabbed Jim's bread. Jim ate his broth in silence. After the meal, the man with the hanging head gave Jim a blanket and showed him a room full of shelves and long boxes where all the boys slept. He pointed to the box Jim was to sleep in. Jim climbed into it and found that he only just had enough room to turn over, small though he was. He tied Lizzie's boots to his wrists in case anyone tried to steal them. Then the dormitory door was locked and they lay in darkness. During the night, an old woman prowled up and down the room with a candle in her hand, holding it up to each boy's face as she passed. Jim could hear boys crying, stifling their sobs as she came and went, little puffs of sound that were hardly there at all. He lay with his eyes closed, the candlelight burning red against his eyelids as she approached and stopped by him. He could hear her snuffly breath and the creak of her boots. He hardly dared to breathe. He lay awake all night, thinking about Emily and Lizzie and worrying about his mother. He longed to see her again. If she was better, maybe she could ask Mr. Sissons to let them go. As soon as it was morning, the door was unlocked. Old Marion's place was taken by the bent man. He shouted at the boys to queue up in the yard for their wash. "I've already broken the ice for you," he told them, "so no thinking you can dodge it." Jim ran after him. The man was so stooped that the top half of his body turned down like a walking stick. "Please, sir," Jim said. "I'm not sir," the man said. "I'm only doing my turn like the rest of them." "I'm only Joseph, not sir." "Please, Joseph, tell me where the infirmary is." "Why should I tell you that?" Joseph asked. "Because Mamma's in there, and I've been good, and Mrs. Sissons said if I was good I could go see Mamma." "So you was the boy who came in last night on your cart then?" "Yes," said Jim. "Please tell me where the infirmary is." "Well, it's upstairs," he said at last. "Only the message I was given by Mrs. Sissons was, don't bother taking the boy up there, because his ma..." He stopped and shook his head. "Your ma's dead, son.